But now at 5, a potential failure watch is something you never want associated with the Lake Livingston Dam. After heavy rains and flooding somehow damaged the dam, KPRC2 is uncovering the extent of that damage and what it means for neighborhoods downstream.
Right now, one side of the largest dam in Texas is sinking about 1/3 of an inch every year. The other side is rising at the exact same rate. 10 years of satellite data confirms it, measured down to a fraction of an inch from 430 miles up. The agency that runs the dam says it isn't happening. More than 3 million people in Houston drink water that flows through this structure every single day. And there is no second river, no backup reservoir, nothing built to replace it if this dam goes. Lake Livingston. Livingston Dam is on the Trinity River about 6 miles southwest of the city of Livingston in Polk County, Texas. And that's the only dam on the main stem of the river. It stretches 2.5 miles across the valley, backed by a wall of compacted earth and a concrete spillway bolted through the middle. And it's the largest single-purpose water supply reservoir in the entire state of Texas. And that single, handedly keeping Houston alive. The Trinity River Authority built the dam and still owns and operates it under contract with the city of Houston, which holds 2/3 of the water rights to the reservoir. The remaining third stays under the authority's control. So how does that water actually reach people's taps? Houston's east and southeast water purification plants draw raw water from the Trinity River at a pump station roughly 35 miles downstream of the dam. And those two plants alone serve more than 3 million customers across the greater Houston metro area, pushing approximately 806 million gallons through the system every single day. But here's the thing. Lake Livingston has zero flood control capacity. The dam manages flow through 12 tainter gates in the concrete spillway, and those gates simply mirror whatever the river does. When the Trinity rises, discharge goes up. When the river drops, discharge drops. Engineers never designed the reservoir to absorb a surge, only to pass the water through, which means the dam has no cushion built into it for exactly the kind of stress event that's being put on it now. Even Houston's own Public Works Department has confirmed that if dam operations failed during peak demand, the alternative supply from Lake Houston through the West Canal could not sustain the full service area. The city does draw from other sources, including Lake Conroe and groundwater wells drilled more than 1,000 feet deep into the Evangeline and Chico aquifers, but none of them carry enough volume to replace what flows from the Trinity River. So a dam failure during peak summer demand wouldn't stay contained to one neighborhood. It would send pressure drops rolling across the metro, trigger mandatory conservation orders, and force hospitals to ration their intake almost immediately, while petrochemical facilities along the ship channel, some of the largest industrial water consumers in the state, would start shutting down supply lines within days. Houston's entire surface water portfolio covers about 86% of the city's needs, with the remaining 14% drawn from groundwater. And the Trinity River, through Livingston Dam, represents the single largest piece of that 86%. There's no plan B here. That's exactly what makes what the satellites found so hard to ignore. Sentinel-1. The European Space Agency operates a pair of satellites called Sentinel-1, orbiting roughly 430 miles above the Earth. They carry a radar system that bounces radio waves off the ground and measures how long the signal takes to return, a technique called interferometric synthetic aperture radar, or INSAR, that can detect vertical movement down to a fraction of an inch. It's like a ruler held from space, measuring whether the ground beneath a structure has shifted since the last pass. That's the tool a team at Virginia Tech turned on Livingston Dam. Led by geophysicist Mohammad Karami and senior researcher Manucher Shirzai, the team used 10 years of Sentinel-1 data, spanning 2015 through 2025, to study 41 high-hazard dams across 13 states and Puerto Rico. Every dam they studied showed some degree of vertical movement, and most of it fell within normal tolerances. Livingston Dam was not one of them. In fact, Karami flagged it as especially high risk, because the northern portion of the dam is dropping roughly 1/3 of an inch per year, while the southern portion rises by the same amount. That's two halves of a single structure pulling in opposite directions year after year for a full decade of satellite observations. Engineers claim that it's differential settlement, where different sections of the foundation shift at different rates, and the structure sitting on top absorbs that stress over time. In an earth-filled dam like Livingston, that kind of sustained tension can feed a slow, hidden erosion process called piping, one that opens pathways through the compacted core and never shows up on the surface until it's already a problem. We'll get into exactly how that works in a minute, because it's the key to this entire story. For now, what matters is that the Army Corps of Engineers' National Inventory of Dams already carries Livingston under an unsatisfactory condition. Rating: the lowest classification in the system, which is exactly the kind of dam you'd expect this movement to show up on. Karami presented these findings in December 2025 at the annual meeting of the American Geophysical Union, and the team was upfront about the limits of what they had. The results are preliminary, they haven't gone through peer review, and satellite data alone doesn't prove a dam is about to fail. Scherze compared it to an anomaly on a medical scan. It tells you where to look and what to investigate, but somebody still has to walk in and run the full exam. So that's the headline finding. To understand how a dam ends up in that position, you have to go back to how it was built in the first place. 1966. Back in the early 1960s, Houston was growing fast and running out of water options. The city's population was closing in on the 1 million mark. Industrial demand along the ship channel kept climbing, and heavy pumping from the Chico and Evangeline aquifers was already causing the land itself to sink, a problem called subsidence that would only get worse with time. The Trinity River was the only surface water source capable of keeping pace with that demand. But the federal government showed no interest in writing the check, so the Trinity River Authority and the city of Houston financed the entire project themselves through revenue bonds, with every dollar set to come back through water sales as Houston kept expanding. With the money secured, the building itself moved fast. Brown and Root handled the design, Forrest and Cotton, Incorporated built it, and construction began on May 28, 1966. The authority actually started filling the reservoir with water in October 1968, months before workers even finished the dam itself, because Houston couldn't afford to wait any longer for the supply. Construction wrapped on August 29, 1969, though the reservoir itself didn't reach full pool until 1971, which is why you'll sometimes see the project's completion date given as either year, depending on whether the source means the dam or the lake. None of that came cheap. The total price tag came in at roughly $84 million in 1969 money, which adjusts to well over $700 million today. The construction contract alone cost $16 million. Rerouting Highway 190 ran $7 million. Relocating 5 farm-to-market roads cost another $3 million. And utility relocations added $4 million more on top. What all that money bought was an earth-filled dam, meaning workers built it from layers of compacted soil and rock rather than poured concrete. Before the water rose. Filling Lake Livingston meant erasing a landscape first. Workers cleared 40,000 acres of East Texas bottomland at a cost of $2.5 million, and the Trinity River Authority acquired 700 parcels of property, relocating 200 families who had lived on that land for generations. This ground had held family farms and homes going back decades, and the authority bought out each piece through purchase agreements tied to the project. Even the dead weren't left behind. Workers exhumed 196 graves from 2 cemeteries and reinterred them on higher ground before the water could rise. What replaced all of it was massive. The reservoir now covers 83,000 surface acres, with more than 450 miles of shoreline stretching across 4 counties, and the dam drains a watershed of more than 16,600 square miles. Every dollar of the effort came from bond revenue redeemed through water sales, and the bet paid off. Houston kept growing, the reservoir kept filling, and for decades, Livingston Dam did exactly what its engineers designed it to do. The water flowed south, the taps stayed on, and the structure held. But there was a deeper problem going on with the structure of the dam that nobody noticed. Inside the earth fill. When it comes to a concrete dam, it shows its problems on the surface, where cracks form visibly and water stains trace the path of internal stress. So you can inspect the exterior and actually learn something real about what's happening underneath. An earth-filled dam won't give you that. Water finds a channel through the compacted core, widens it grain by grain, and carries material downstream, particle by particle, while the surface above looks perfectly stable the entire time. That process is piping, and it's the primary way earth-fill dams fail. The erosion builds slowly, sometimes over decades, opening pathways through the interior that nobody can see, and then it can accelerate suddenly with almost no warning from the outside at all. The Teton Dam in Idaho showed exactly how fast that turn can happen. On June 5, 1976, a piping failure caused the entire 305-foot earth-fill structure to collapse within hours of the first visible seepage, killing 11 people and destroying thousands of homes across the Snake River Plain. Every part of this story comes back to that same engineering reality. The erosion you can't see is the one that matters. Livingston Dam got its first real test of exactly that reality in September 2005. September 2005. Hurricane Rita tore through East Texas on September 23, 2005, and it hit Livingston Dam in about the worst possible way. Rita's counterclockwise winds blew north to south across the full length of the lake, generating waves up to 4 feet high that hammered the dam's upstream face for hours. Bill Holder, a longtime Trinity River Authority employee who oversaw Lake Livingston, later called Rita one of the most challenging experiences of his career on the project, and the damage backed that up. When the storm passed, the waves had stripped 11,000 feet of riprap, the heavy layer of protective stone armoring the earthen embankment, completely off the upstream face, leaving bare soil exposed directly to the water. Every hour it stayed unprotected raised the risk of erosion cutting deeper, so the Trinity River Authority dropped the pool level by 4 feet as an emergency measure, while FEMA and the city of Houston covered the $9.6 million repair bill. Archer Western contractors hauled in 72,215 tons of limestone across 3,183 truckloads, plus nearly 16,000 tons of bedding rock and another 687 loads, all of it quarried out of Navarro County near Corsicana. The restoration wrapped up by late April 2006, though a severe drought kept the lake from reaching its regular pool level again until that November. Rita proved the dam's surface armor could fail under heavy stress, and crews gave the exterior a full restoration in response. But nobody ran an equivalent deep assessment on the compacted earth-fill core underneath, which happens to be the exact zone where piping erosion does its work invisibly. That gap between what got fixed and what never got checked was just there for nearly 2 decades, until the river itself forced the issue. Trinity floods. Heavy rainfall in the spring of 2024 pushed the Trinity River to historic levels. Polk, San Jacinto, Liberty, Walker, and Trinity counties all declared states of disaster, and Polk County issued mandatory evacuation orders as floodwaters overtook roads and low-lying areas around the lake. On May 4th, the spillway's discharge hit 124,260 cubic feet per second, smashing the previous record of 110,600 cubic feet per second set during Hurricane Harvey in 2017. The strain kept building from there. On May 16th, the same day a deadly derecho tore through southeast Texas, the Trinity River Authority activated its emergency action plan after inspectors found a partial failure of the left downstream training wall, along with active erosion eating into the area around it. Then came June 26th. After several failed attempts to get close enough to the spillway for a proper inspection, crews finally closed all 12 gates long enough to examine the stilling basin, the structure sitting directly below the spillway designed to absorb the force of released water. And what they found was bad. The discharge had stripped all the riprap and scoured through the clay, fill all the way down to the apron of the dam. Chad Holton, the TRA project manager for the Livingston project, later described a 50-foot scour hole beneath the apron under gates 4 and 5, with water having carved 10 feet below the end sill. Engineers filed a report with federal regulators stating that the damage threatens the integrity of the dam and declared it an emergency condition requiring immediate action. 2 days later, on June 28th, the Trinity River Authority declared a potential failure watch, a formal designation one step below active failure. With that designation in place, there was no time left to waste. Race and barrel. Crews worked around the clock from there, pouring nearly 1,000 cubic yards of concrete into the stilling basin to stabilize the damage, starting before sunrise and running through the night under floodlights because Hurricane Beryl was tracking towards southeast Texas, and the forecast models kept tightening the timeline. Chad Holton later described how crews built a temporary dike just to get trucks close enough to pump concrete into barges over the damaged area, a logistical feat he credited in part to federal and state emergency management teams brainstorming solutions on site. The Trinity River Authority also coordinated with the Federal Aviation Administration to establish a temporary flight restriction over the dam, blocking unauthorized drone flights over what federal and state regulators classify as critical infrastructure, and treated the repair zone as a full construction site with access limited to authorized personnel only. It came down to the wire. The Trinity River Authority completed and tested the emergency repairs on July 7, 2024, one day before Beryl made landfall. The storm dropped 4 to 5 inches of rain on the area, and 10 of the 12 dam gates came through in full operation, with crews scheduling the remaining 2 for restoration that fall. Those repairs stabilized the Stilling Basin and filled the scour hole, which addressed what record-breaking water had done to the surface. What nobody had publicly addressed yet was why independent satellite data from 2 separate teams showed the structure itself drifting in directions that go far deeper than any concrete pour can reach. Value.space. That satellite data didn't start with Virginia Tech. Before their study reached the public, a London-based satellite monitoring company called Value.space had already been watching Livingston Dam on its own. Co-founder Rayo Pold conducted a 3-year assessment and shared the findings with KPRC2 in Houston in early July 2024, right in the middle of the emergency repair timeline, while crews on the ground were still pumping concrete into the Stilling Basin. His team identified 5 distinct areas of movement on the dam's slope and spillway, including a 350-foot section on the west side of the spillway that showed what Pold called significant deformation, with similar movement turning up on the east side. Those areas sank at a rate of 0.22 to 0.55 inches per year, and the finding that mattered most was the acceleration. Movement on the spillway tripled between September 2023 and mid-2024. Pold put that number in context, pointing out that the United States has roughly 90,000 dams, and that since the 1980s, the country has averaged about 24 dam failures per year. He urged engineers to investigate what his data had flagged as soon as possible. So, by this point, 2 completely independent satellite analyses, using different data sets and different methodologies, had landed on the same conclusion. Something inside this dam was moving in ways that surface-level concrete could never fix. Yet the agency's next move, just a few months later, was to close the book on the emergency, not open a new one. January 2025. In January 2025, the Trinity River Authority wrapped up construction tied to the emergency response and downgraded the dam's emergency action plan, status from potential failure watch to watch condition. That watch condition still requires continued monitoring and evaluation of the spillway, and the agency has since worked with dam engineers to design permanent improvements, with construction expected to begin in 2027. Money started moving soon after. In November 2025, Congressman Pete Sessions announced that FEMA had approved a $30 million grant to reimburse the Trinity River Authority for its 2024 emergency work. Though according to TRA General Manager Kevin Ward, the grant reimbursed the authority for part of what it spent, not the full cost of the repairs. The state got involved too. The Texas legislature stepped in during the 89th legislative session, appropriating funding to assist with permanent improvements. And that same session produced Senate Bill 7 and House Joint Resolution 7, which together dedicated up to $1 billion annually from state sales tax revenue to the Texas Water Fund, starting September 1st, 2027. Texas voters approved the constitutional amendment as Proposition 4 on November 4th, 2025. So money is finally moving toward the dam. But the permanent repairs remain in the design phase. Construction sits more than a year away, and every storm season between now and then rolls through the Trinity River watershed with the potential to push the dam back into crisis. That tension funding secured on paper while repairs remained years away, is exactly what boiled over next. May 2026. By late May 2026, with hurricane season approaching again, a video citing the Virginia Tech findings had spread widely online, and it pushed the story past the research community and straight into the neighborhoods actually living with the dam. Doug Haude of the TRA later said the agency heard real concern from people both around the reservoir and downstream of it, and that concern is what forced the authority to respond directly and publicly for the first time. The Trinity River Authority responded with a public statement saying the video's claims appeared inconsistent with verified inspection records and direct engineering observations. Doug Haude from the TRA told ABC 13 that based on their gauges, tools, and data, the agency sees no evidence the dam is moving or that anything threatens its integrity, had offered a different framing in his earlier comments to the Washington Post. He acknowledged that satellite surveillance has value across the country's thousands of dams, but suggested that the small movements detected at Livingston could come from harmless sources like traffic on the road that runs along the dam's crest. So, you have the satellite teams on one side saying the data shows movement that warrants closer investigation, and the agency managing the dam on the other side saying their on-the-ground monitoring shows no signs of a problem. And now you have two sides claiming two different things. 92,000 dams. The United States holds more than 92,000 dams, and nearly 17,000 carry a high hazard potential classification, meaning their failure would likely cause deaths and significant property damage. The average age of the country's dams now sits above 60 years, and a large share had already passed the 50-year mark by 2025. Engineers designed these structures for a climate and a population pattern that no longer exists, and communities have expanded around dams that originally posed very little risk when builders finished them in the 1960s and 70s. The money to fix that gap simply isn't there. In March 2025, the Association of State Dam Safety Officials released a report estimating the cost to rehabilitate all non-federal dams at $165.2 billion, with the cost for high-hazard dams alone coming to $37.4 billion. And federal funding covers only a fraction of that total. In its 2025 report card, the American Society of Civil Engineers gave the nation's dams a grade of D+, an improvement from a flat D in the previous report, but still one of the lowest scores of any category graded. The failures at Edenville Dam in Michigan in 2020 and Rapidan Dam in Minnesota in 2024 showed exactly what happens when maintenance falls behind on aging infrastructure like this. It's why the Virginia Tech team's goal now is a publicly accessible interactive map showing real-time movement data for every high-hazard dam in the country, updated continuously from satellite feeds, which brings the story back to the one dam this all started with. Back in Houston. As of late June 2026, the reservoir sits at full capacity. Houston draws its drinking water from a river controlled by a 56-year-old earthfill structure that two independent satellite teams flagged as showing some of the most pronounced deformation in their entire data set. The Trinity River Authority says its ground-level monitoring shows no signs of a problem. The Virginia Tech team says their satellite data warrants closer examination. If that interactive satellite map Karami and Shirzai want to build ever goes live, Livingston would light up near the top. The emergency repairs from 2024 stabilized the immediate damage, and the TRA spent more than $45 million making sure the stilling basin and spillway held together. Permanent spillway improvements remain in the design phase, with construction projected for 2027 at the earliest. The dam sits on the only river large enough to supply Houston at scale, and nobody has identified a second source capable of filling the gap if the Trinity supply ever goes offline. And every spring, the Trinity River swells with seasonal rainfall, pushing through the same spillway, past the same stilling basin, and over the same earthfill embankment that workers finished in 1969. The satellites keep collecting data on every pass. The repair timeline stretches well into next year, and the reservoir, as of this week, holds every drop its engineers built it to carry. What do you think should happen here? Should satellite monitoring become a requirement for every high-hazard dam in the country, or is traditional engineering inspection still enough? Drop your take in the comments. Subscribe for more Mega Build stories.